All right, so you've reached the end of chord county. It's time for the master summary. You've learned major triads, minor, dominant, diminished, sevens, ninths, 11s, 13s, altered chords. JP and myself have taken you through the world of chords. You have just about everything you need to be prepared in this gospel music genre, even jazz, blues, the other styles as well. They all borrow from this same pot. So let's go to the keyboard and I'm just going to do a master summary. I'm not going to explain them again, just real brief descriptions to make sure you got everything because I know we covered a lot. So I'll be in the key of C. We'll start with our major chord. Now there's several ways to do it. We covered the number system. You could do 1, 3, 5 and be done. Any scale, 1, 3, 5. You could also do whole steps and half steps, major third on the bottom, which is 4 half steps, minor third on top, which is 3 half steps, and that's another way to figure it out. We studied the minor triad. Easiest way for me to do this is to take that third, which is this E in the middle, and to just flat it a half step. Very simple. And that gives you C, E flat, and G. Another way that Jonathan talked about is actually pulling from the minor scale. A little bit more involved. You need to know your minor scales, but if you do know them, you can just take the first, third, and fifth tone straight from your minor scale and be done. So 2 ways. You can convert major to minor by just lowering that middle note, which happens to be the third of the chord, 1, 2, 3, lower it a half step, and you got your minor chord. That is the foundation. That creates all the other chords. From here, we studied the diminished chord. Now we learned you could take this minor chord and you could simply lower your fifth. You got to be good with numbers in this game. The fifth is G in this chord. C, D, E, F, G. That's the fifth tone. We're just lowering it to G flat. So then you get C, E flat, and G flat. And we established that as a diminished triad. It's just 3 tones. We'll cover the bigger one later. So you got major, you got minor, you got diminished, and I'm not sure if we covered augmented, which we did. So you're going to take the C major chord, and instead of lowering the fifth tone, like we did, and the third tone, of course, you're going to start with the major chord, and you're going to sharp the fifth tone. So it's going to give you a more open sound, different type of sound. And that's C, E, and G sharp. So those are your basic qualities: major, minor, diminished, augmented. Those are your qualities. From there, we study 7th chords. So that's where you build upon the triads you already know. If it's going to be a major something, well, you're always going to start with that major triad. If it's going to be a minor something, like minor 7, minor 9, minor 11, minor 13, you're always going to have that triad, unless we're trying to be stylistically different or we're trying to be creative. Yeah, we may omit some notes, as you saw Jonathan doing, but generally you're going to start with your foundation. If it's going to be a diminished, you're always going to have that diminished root chord, that triad. Same thing with augmented. You're always going to have that. So we moved on to 7th chords, and the first thing we studied was the major 7th chord. And that's pretty simple. You just take your triad and you add the 7th degree of that same major scale. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. B is the 7th tone of C. Simply add that to what you already know, and we figured out that C, E, G, B would give us a nice, pretty, jazzy 7th chord. How do you do your dominant chords? Because that's a new one. That's one that you kind of get from the same major triad, but it goes a little left field because we want a bluesy. R-E-S-P-E-C-T. That's what we get with those dominant chords. They're bluesy, they're powerful, they're present. And so you get that by taking the same major. It starts major just like your major 7, but instead of having that regular 7 degree, you're going to have a flat 7 degree. So we just simply take the B and we flat it. We make it B flat, that gives us that dominant chord. And you can also call that, some people call that the dominant 7th degree because it's associated with the dominant chord, just this C and B flat here. Really is all you need. It creates that dominant sound. Add the E. I mean, those are really the power packed tones right there. The G, It's just filler because the G is in everything. Let's face it, doesn't do too much to the chord. So that's your dominant. Now to get minor from here is very easy because you already have the flat 7, and that's also a part of the minor 7 chord too. So the only difference is to take this third tone right here and flat it. So you get E flat now. So the difference being C, E flat, G, and B flat. And that'll give you your minor 7th chord. So you have major 7, C, E, G, B, or 1, 3, 5, 7. You got your dominant 7, which is C, E, G, B flat, or 1, 3, 5, flat 7. And then you have your minor 7, which is 1, flat 3, 5, and the flat 7. You can also do what JP said and take every other note of the minor scale. If you're good with minor scale, it's a straight 1, 3, 5, 7, not of the major scale, but the minor scale. Now, the good news is once you know all your different 7 chords, major, dominant, minor, the 9ths, the 11ths, and the 13ths, as we studied, are a piece of cake because this won't change. These won't change at all. You're just adding the 9, 11, or 13. And as we established, the 9 is really like the 2nd tone of the scale because all we're doing is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. That's all we're doing is we're extending the scale out. So had we not started all over, this would have been a 2. The 9 would very well be 2, if we wanted to start all over. This 11 right here would have been the 4th tone of the scale. Heck, F is the 4th. That's how I know it. And A, let's face it, that would normally be the 6th, but now that we're getting into these big, bad extended chords, we extend it out and we call them 9s, 11s, and 13s. I wish I could tell you more about the history of that, but that's just how we do things, okay? So all you gotta do is take this major 7 and add the 9th tone, and the good news is that's a major 9. It's like the 9 hijacks the situation, takes over, and you're good to go now, but it's called a major 9. And I do like what it adds to the situation. It makes it a lot more jazzier. The good news is the 9 is always gonna be the 9. You never have to worry about the 9 changing. So we can change our bottom chord to a minor 7 chord. And if we add the 9 hijacks it. I know that's a negative word to use, but that's what happens. And this becomes a minor 9 chord. All we did was start with our minor 7, added the 9, and now we get a minor 9. Same thing happens with the dominant. You start with the dominant 7 that you know all too well now, add the 9 never changes. And the key of C is gonna be D. Add that 9, and now you got yourself a C dominant 9. If you wanna be cool, you could just say C9, that's for short. The good news is, as you learned, you do the same thing with the 11th chords. No different. All you do is add the 11. So whatever used to be 9, just add the 11th here. Now at this point, you're gonna have to use 2 hands because it's just gonna get too hard. So you can play C right here or C on your bass, as JP explained. And this isn't a common chord, but you should know it. This is what you call the major 11th. And all we did was take the major 9, which came from the major 7, added the 9, added the 11. Now technically, to have an 11th chord, you must have the 9. And to have a 9 chord, you must have the 7. They're kind of built on top of each other. Or otherwise, you would simply say omit. That means to leave out. So I can have a chord and leave out one of these other degrees if I want to, but I need to specify that. Okay, and I do the same thing. If I want to make this dominant, I lower this 7th tone from B to B flat. That's all I have to do, and now I have myself a dominant 11 chord. And if I wanted to make this minor, all I do is lower my 3rd tone. As you guys know, I lower it a half step to E flat. And this is the chord we all like in gospel music. That's a very popular one. We like that one. But the other ones, as JP talked about, the major 11, not that common. You will find it in certain genres, dominant 11, again, I think it's that tension between the F and the E. We talked about that. Those clash. So obviously, sometimes, you're playing the F alone and no E. That'll work. You have to omit some things, as we talked about. I won't repeat that stuff. But that's your 11 chords. And lastly, for your 13 chords, it's the same thing. You can take this major 11th, and all you have to do is add the A, which is the 13th of the key or the 6th of the key, but we're going to call it 13. And that creates a monster of a chord. Now you need to scoot everything over. Look how many fingers. Now obviously you don't play that as is. That's one of those things you gotta play differently, as JP said. But for the purposes of understanding how these are structured, is basically your regular major 7th with the added 9, added 11, and added 13th. The one that is common is the dominant 13th chord, and that's gonna give us that chord. But like JP said, oftentimes you don't even want that third in there. We omit the third, and it gives us a bigger gospel chord. And oftentimes the 5th tone as well. So you get this chord, And then oftentimes the other inversion is, instead of playing the 11th, you omit that and bring the 3rd back. But you don't want this 11 and this 3rd in the same chord. That's what really makes things awkward. So it's either one or the other. You're either gonna take this out and play B flat, D, F, and A, as we studied, or take the F out and play B flat, D, E, and A. So now we have an E. It's the difference between this F and E. And oftentimes in gospel music, you will even resolve down. You can go from the F to the E, like in praise songs. A lot of people. So you'll hear movement, but not really at the same time. And then the last chord was the sharp 9, sharp 5. And it had its base in the dominant chord. So it's basically a dominant chord, but what we do, and I'll play it up here, is we take the 9 and we sharp it. So instead of going C, E, G, B flat, D, we go C, E, G, B flat, D sharp. Now that's just part of the alteration, because to alter means to change the chord. You're gonna be lowering and raising stuff. You're not gonna go with the normal chord as we've just learned. So we've already sharped the 9. Now we need to sharp the 5. What's the 5th of this key? It's that G. We're gonna sharp it. And so you get yourself a chord that looks like this. So you have your, that's how it looks. You got C, E, G sharp, because we're sharping G, B flat, and D sharp. And that's a good passing chord. We do it. That's one of those kind of chords. You could do that as well, but you'll learn that in Pattern Paradise. And then the last alteration you learn is pretty much the same chord, but instead of taking this D right here and sharpening it to D sharp, we actually flatted it, giving us a flat 9 sharp 5 chord. So, and that's pretty much the same purpose as the other chord. It just depends on what your melody is doing as you learn. It just depends. So I've summarized for you the major triads, the 7ths, the 9ths, the 11ths, the 13ths, the minors, the diminishes, the dominants, the alter chords. You got it all here. You got the step-by-step instruction, but you also have the 10-minute summary. Whichever one works for you, learn these chords, master these chords, try to take them up to all 12 keys if you understand the concept of transposition. If not, wait on the future DVDs. I'm Jermaine Griggs, and remember, if you can hear it, you can play it.